just tell you a little bit about Michelle. She is an only child and a military brat and spent a lot of time alone with the radio and stories. She would often imagine she was a backup singer for the Beatles, Elvis, and later the Commodores and Earth, Wind and Fire. When she wasn't singing with the band or moving to a new base, she developed a love of creating her own stories and journaling like Anne Frank. She lived near Amsterdam, the Netherlands, during her middle school years. In high school, her English teacher said she would give Irma Bombeck a run for her money. In her senior year, her poem Gemstone was selected as the cover poem for the Creative Writing Classes Literary Journal. With plans to be the first in her family to go to college, she attempted a year at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and discovered restaurant work and parties to be far more educational. More so, she wanted out of Nebraska's weather, and so she married young and back into the military life. She never let go of being the first one in her family to go to college, so as a divorced single mom, she started attending the local community college as a business major. With life-altering encouragement from California poet Catherine Fraga, she switched from business to poetry, transferred to California State University, Sacramento, and completed a master's in poetry under Sacramento poet laureate Dennis Schmidt. Over the past 20 years, and many of the poems featured in a recently released Man Kills Girlfriend Over Cold Sandwiches and Other Sad Tales were published in local literary magazines like the Susan Valley Review and Sierra Journal. Many Are Making Love won the California State University Sacramento Bozzanella Award. Upon completing her master's in poetry, Michelle joined the Adjunct Freeway Flyers Club and began teaching writing and literature for Los Rios Community College District, Yuba Community College, and Sierra Community College until being hired full-time with Sierra College in 2004. During her tenure at Sierra College, she has been responsible for producing the first California Community College production of Eve Ensler's The Vagina Monologues, which raised money to support women surviving domestic abuse. She has been the faculty advisor for Sierra College's Sierra Journal literary publication. She has organized poetry readings and writing workshops celebrating and supporting Love Your Body, social justice, Pride Week, and returning veterans. Michelle is also a mother of 2 incredible human beings and 5 rescue kitties. She is a committed fan of Dave Matthews Band, Indigenous Ways of Knowing, and she is still dedicated to figuring out how to be a better version of herself every day. Michelle Johnson.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Josh. Thanks for joining us today, joining me, and letting me be the first to kick off this midway to our cool Sierra Writing Conference in February. And so without further ado, I will get started. I want to hopefully share my screen here, and hopefully everything will go as according to plan. All right. And let's see. Move this out of the way. Let's see. Think like this. There we go. All right. So hopefully everybody can see my PowerPoint. And so I wanted to start out with the land acknowledgement, and I will read that, and then we'll give respect and honor to the Nisenan and Miwok peoples, and I will just go ahead and read it right now. With honor, we acknowledge the Rockland campus of Sierra College as the traditional and unceded land of the Nisenan and Miwok peoples. The secret ravine, known in Nisenan as Hoyok, is home to an ancestral village site nurtured and protected for generations by local tribal nations and their members. Sierra College commits to an ongoing relationship with United Auburn Indian Community and other local tribes to respect the legacy of the first peoples of this land and their future generations who are an integral part of the Sierra College community. And I wanted to start off with the theme here, or starting out with this idea of people, places, and practices. And Lynette was really very thorough in my personal statement, but I'm going to go ahead and start again with my personal statement to kind of just give you some background information about who my people and places and what my practices are and how it relates to the discussion that we're going to have today. So first, just a little bit about me. I'm a white woman and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a mom, as we found out. I'm also a grandmother and now a twice divorced, but now in a happy relationship with a Filipina American PhD candidate at UC Davis in Native American Studies. I am a 20 years plus writing, literature, and poetry with lots of MLA sprinkled in as a professor at Sierra College. My first collection of poetry, we found out, was released in October of 2020. I'm super excited about that. And just to do a shameless plug, is available at Amazon, local booksellers, and Finishing Line Press. I'm also the Emoja program writing instructor, and I'm going on my 5th year working with that program. And I'm also the instructor of the Introduction to Native and Indigenous Literatures, which is a specialized course, 1B course. I'm an accomplice, an activist, and a supporter of the movements toward decolonizing institutional mindsets that have privileged for far too long Euro-Western narratives over Black, Indigenous, and people of color or BIPOC stories because they don't present protagonists and characters and narrators and speakers in roles that are comfortable and familiar to the dominant culture. It is my personal goal to help folks get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Perhaps Lewis Owens, who's Cherokee, presents the best kind of argument to what I will be up to today. In his essay, Columbus Had It Coming, he argues for readers of Native literatures, and I would extend to BIPOC literatures as well, to navigate through what he calls cross readings, which means to read across the lines of cultural identities around and within us. It is not easy, but it is necessary, and the rewards are immeasurable. It is quite clearly the only way the community we call life will survive. Finally, I feel it is important to acknowledge that I am aware, excuse me, of what can be perceived as problematic. Sorry. And that is, obviously, I am not a woman of color, nor am I an Indigenous woman preparing to deliver this discussion and workshop today and to talk about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So why I tell you this is because I feel like it's important to let you know that I'm aware of my being, and all I can really offer to you is the experiences that I have and have tried to expand and stretch the types of literatures that I offer my students, so that all of my students can say that they feel represented in the literatures that we explore, so much so that they can imagine themselves in the future and maybe even leading the way 7 generations forward. So I like to tell my students this little bit all the time, that everything is connected. And I tell them this because I think it's really valuable that when we give into the realization that everything is connected, possibilities become endless. So too is it with the origin stories of both Afro, and I was recently told some folks like to say African futurism, so I'm combining it. So Afro, African, and Indigenous futurisms. These isms are connected through the effects of settler colonialism and ongoing racism, capitalism, and xenophobia. As a result of these shared experiences, BIPOC scholars recognized that many of their communities' stories offered in academic settings and also featured in popular culture were more often than not the stories of a dark and traumatic past. slavery, genocide, forced relocations, rape, kidnapping of children, benevolent assimilations, and leaving folks without hope of escape or living into the future. And indeed, that is part of their stories, but it is not all. Imagine reading only stories of pain and suffering. I'm reminded of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, which posits a truth, which I'm going to paraphrase here, that says, imagine this reality, that if you tell the story of a people over and over again as just one thing, that is what they become, right? And so this notion of us all being connected means that we have stories in us that are connected to the stories of others. And we need to open up ourselves to these possibilities by this recognition. And all of a sudden, I'm just incredibly nervous. And so I'm hopefully going to calm down here just in a little bit. So this notion of it's all connected, and then how this lies into the African American and Indigenous Futurisms, right? That the scholars recognized that only certain stories were being told, and normally they were dark, and normally it had their peoples, their communities stuck in a past. So the purpose of Afro and African futurisms and Indigenous futurisms is to work to stretch and expand these notions of story. And these stories that have been created since time immemorial, okay? So define, what is Afrofuturism? So Afrofuturism more concretely can be understood as a wide-ranging social, political, and artistic movement that dares to imagine a world where African-descended and Black peoples and their cultures play a central role in the creation of that world. And Indigenous Futurisms is a term that was originally coined by Grace Dillon of Portland State University, and it was in response to Afrofuturism. And it's a movement that is concerned with placing Indigenous peoples, Indigenous ways of knowing, and perspectives of past, present, and future in multi-mediums, art, literature, games, music, clothing, and technology. Responding to Afrofuturism, it is an effort to imagine futures with Indigenous peoples playing a pivotal role in that reimagination and creation. So we see parallels here that both of those futurisms are in response to one another. So very much like that idea of being connected. So it's an introduction. What I want to share with you is this introduction, the definition, and then I want to give you some examples of how this futurism took place and how it came into being. So perhaps at the center of these movements, the one person who is often credited with creating literature for Afro and African American or African futurism, the Afro and African, good grief, the Afro-African futurism movement is the queen, the late great Octavia E. Butler. It is impossible to research either of these movements without tripping on Butler's work. Her first work to gain critical acclaim is the novel Kindred. It was published in 1979, which has the protagonist, a Black female writer who time travels back and forth without warning to antebellum South white slave plantation to meet the slave owner there, who she learns later is her family. It's pretty complicated stuff. This particular work is the cornerstone of the movement because it breaks the chains, pun intended, of keeping Black people trapped in slave narratives. It re-envisions what that narrative can be and acknowledges the complicated histories of family. It realizes that our stories are tangled and twisted together, white and Black. Two other of Butler's works, which I have been using in my classes since the election of 2016, are Parable of the Sower, which was published in 1993, and Parable of the Talents, which was published in 1998. Butler was interested in sci-fi writer Robert Heinlein's theory that there are three kinds of science fiction categories. The what if category, the if only category, and if this goes on category, meaning the futuristic stories are generated by imaginative contemplations of what if this happens, or if only this thing had occurred, or if this moment were different, to the final, if this administration goes on, this is our future, right? So the parable novels explored this final category. The first novel is set in the not so distant future, 2024. And part of the reason why I was drawn to selecting Parable of the Sower was that in my 1B classes, my students would often say that they had a hard time identifying with the literature that I had selected. They couldn't relate, or if it was some futuristic thing, it was too far in the future and they couldn't understand it. So that Parable of the Sower begins in 2024 is very, very close to their reality. And it's produced some really fabulous results. So Parable of the Sower, if you're not familiar, taps into so many of the issues that we are confronting now: climate change, drug addiction, constitutional crisis, non-working public institutions, the privatization of once public institutions like education and even community. Butler calls on the readers to pay attention to what can happen if we do not pay attention to the events and scientists and thinkers of the time. More specifically, Butler offers that the Parable of the Sower is a cautionary tale, whereas Parable of the Talents, which is the second work in what was supposed to be a trilogy, a novel that offers solutions. So Parable of the Talents imagines a different future for the country, the United States, and specifically California. She advances this new future with this guidance of a lack for a better term, religion. She advances this religion in her novels called Earthseed. And the central tenet of this life philosophy is from her collection of writings called Earthseed, the Books of the Living. And one of the central tenets within the novels, both of the novels, is this statement, which is, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. So the premise of this belief system is that change is all around us, and the difficulties often arise when we resist or ignore change, or when we try to keep things the same because it's easier or more comfortable. Much of the conflict in both of the novels is centered around this issue of how do we confront change. Olamina's father in the first novel is a professor and preacher who very much acknowledges that there are dark changes on the horizon, but believes that as long as the community believes in maintaining ritual and what has been, that things will eventually get better. Olamina, on the other hand, does not believe in this thinking and believes that God is not going to save them, but more so that God is within all of them, ready to be shaped and molded into existences that offer a future that moves with the times and eventually will guide people to be relocated in the stars. In short, God is change. Embrace this philosophy, and there is promise for the future. The other strength of these works is that the Earthseed community that she eventually creates in this novel is diverse in all possible ways. There are multiracial peoples coming together, there are gay couples, there are newly formed families, varying ages and abilities. The protagonist herself suffers from what is called a disability in the novel, called hyperempathy syndrome. And all of this is to say that these worlds that she's created imagines people of color in future and taking control of the difficulties and coming up with solutions that are really very powerful. Now, these novels don't paint a happily ever after scenario, nor does the Parable of the Talents offer a 1, 2, 3 step solution to climate change, drug addiction, lack of water, fringe and conspiracy theory thinkers. but it does offer a way of seeing and thinking that the future has possibilities. And that's at the very heart of Afro and African futurism. Before I continue on, I just want to iterate what I'm trying to do for you all is to sort of lay down a foundation of, in a very basic and quick way, what Afrofuturism and what I will soon talk about in Indigenous Futurism, what they are trying to do, and by giving you some examples of some works that are out there so that hopefully you'll be inspired, because this is a big topic and clearly we wouldn't have time to discuss everything and also have time to work on imagining futurisms for ourselves. So just wanted to reiterate that. Moving on to the next segment of this genre is Indigenous Futurisms. And a work that's centered in discussions right now on this particular topic is a collection of multi-genre writings published in 2012 entitled Walking the Clouds, an anthology of Indigenous science fiction, which is edited by Dr. Grace L. Dillon, the woman responsible for coming up with Indigenous Futurisms. This particular work includes seminal Indigenous writers like Gerald Visner, who's Chippewa, William Sanders, who's Cherokee, and Leslie Marmon Silko, who's Laguna Pueblo Mexican, along with newer writers like Stephen Graham Jones, who's Blackfeet, and Nolo Hopkinson. And these excerpts and short stories and poems offer futures where indigeneity is celebrated for its survivance, its ability to transcend apocalyptic histories. For example, in Graham Jones' work in the selection, he revises the Lone Ranger story, and it is actually the Lone Ranger who is subservient to Tonto. It's a new West indeed. I also like to think of queer writers like Daniel Heath Justice, who's Cherokee, who has written an incredible short fiction entitled Tatterborn. This particular short work resees the classic Wizard of Oz story. And little do people maybe know that L. Frank Baum was actually very much for the killing of every last Native American after he heard about the massacre at Wounded Knee. So in many ways, Justice in creating this short fiction entitled Tatterborn is taking the fantastic elements of the Wizard of Oz and then reclaiming them and re-seeing them with an Indigenous point of view. And in many ways, if you have been paying attention to this re-seeing or taking writers' works from the past that have a dangerous history, so to speak, and then reclaiming them, it's really a very powerful artistic creation, right? Imagining new futures. I don't know if many of you caught Lovecraft Country, but H.P. Lovecraft is a very, he was a racist writer of science fiction, and Misha Green retooled H.P. Lovecraft stories and creating Lovecraft Country, which was on HBO. And again, it puts Black and brown folks at the center of the narrative, where previously they were pushed off to the sides and only victims of really a dark and tragic past. And so imagine if you are a person of color and you're reading these stories and you don't see yourself present. That's the beauty of futurisms, I think, is that they place BIPOC folks in the center of the narratives. They're coming up with solutions, and they're not playing the stereotypical roles that we often anticipate seeing them. So stories really matter, and Indigenous futurisms really matter. And I thought it would be really powerful to share what I think is a really powerful poem and a lovely way to move into the writing portion of this this little talk here. And I did want to ask, though, before I play this, did you have any questions or any observations that you'd like to make? I realize I'm kind of whipping through this a little bit quickly, and there's always the process of delivering these little lectures in the classroom and then the Zoom creates a kind of a new experience where I feel out of my element, even though I know what I'm talking about. And so I did want to ask if anybody had any questions or observations that you wanted to share before I move into the next part here. No questions. Okay. All right. I will have a works cited at the end. And of course, there's tons and tons. And I wanted to put together a big list. And I'm happy to share some of the works that I find really wonderful. If you wanted to shoot me an email, I'm happy to send the list along. But there will be a works cited at the end of this presentation. I wouldn't be an English teacher if I didn't have that good stuff. But anyway, I want to play this short little video, and it's the poem is entitled "For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet." And it was written by Joy Harjo. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Joy Harjo, but Joy Harjo is the United States Poet Laureate, and she actually is the first Native American Poet Laureate in 2021, first, right? And they were here first. It's weird, right? She should have been the first, or someone should have been the first. But she has a quick little setup for this really powerful poem that I think really encapsulates this idea of what future looks like, which is that it doesn't keep people stuck in the past. It doesn't keep people stuck in this notion that if they exist in stories, that it's only delivered through trauma. And it offers a way of viewing the future in a way that has us coming together and working to solve problems. So I'm going to go ahead and play this now.
I think what really set me free was knowing that even the stories that I thought made me feel such shame, that once I embraced those stories and saw that they could be useful material, that they could be transformed into something useful, it freed me. I think that's where a lot of our people get lost, because they get lost in those pockets of shame. They get lost in pockets of history, of personal, family, or history. So this is a poem we can all find the way back. We need each other's help. We need each other's art. We need the poetry. That's part of it. I've had many teachers in my life. Many of them are gone. It's really hard what gets difficult about this age is that those teachers, most of your teachers and mentors are gone. They're on the other side. They leave their words with you, and you always say, "Dang, I wish I would have paid more attention," or, I was a better listener. But if you sit for a while, you can find them, because those words and those teachings were planted there. I still miss them. And I wouldn't have been able to write this poem without those teachers showing me the way that, yes, it is possible to embrace what you are, who you are, and to find the way back. And as you find your way back, we always help others. It's called "For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet." Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door and close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth, gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place else to go. Make a giveaway, and remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. I think
So I really love that poem, and I think it's like I said, it's a valuable way of articulating this idea of futurism, what it looks like, and I think it's a nice way to segue into the writing portion of this. As promised, this is a workshop. If you thought I was going to be talking at you for the entire time, don't worry. I wanted to get to the good stuff, but I wanted to get to the good stuff, and then thinking about this idea of what futurism is and how it relates to us, and particularly if we're thinking, okay, well, I'm not a person of color, I'm not Indigenous, so is this futurism for me? And the idea is I'm not, endorsing cultural appropriation at all. That's not what I'm endorsing. But more so, what I want to do is let you know that these stories and ideas have been here long before we had a name for it, right? That these stories and writers and creators were creating futures with people of color at the center of those stories. It's just that institutions for a very long time kept those stories at bay. And so that we are now celebrating a variety of stories. And again, coming back to that idea of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, right? That stories matter. And that's the theme of this, upcoming Sierra Writers Conference. Stories matter, but not just one story, a lot of stories. And so that also means looking at what stories have already existed and how can we expand and stretch that notion of what stories can look like, and how can we be more inclusive in this 21st century. And so that means inviting more stories into the fold and really seeing futures in new and powerful ways. So I wanted to set up the writing that we're going to do with another little story about Octavia Butler. And unfortunately, she died way too young. And in fact, she was, her Parable series was originally supposed to be a trilogy. And she was never able to complete the last trilogy. It was supposed to be Parable of the Trickster. And part of that notion of God is change and finding root and home and destiny in the stars. The protagonist of the stories really believed that for many people, they wouldn't be able to find their future on Earth, that where they would really be able to flourish was in another planet altogether. So that we see parallels of, our billionaires flying around in space, and this big push to go to Mars is actually in many ways foreseen in Butler's Parable of the Talent, or Parable of the Sower. And so this idea of being elsewhere was what was going to be developed in Parable of the Trickster. She died, I want to say, and I could be wrong, in 2006. And all of her writings are housed at the Huntington Library in Pasadena. And it was an anniversary of her, or a memorial to her death. The Huntington Library opened up an exhibit of Butler's works, and I went, and it was magical. And I discovered that what Butler did, and this is a picture of her actual writing, is that before she would write, or when she was writing on her project, she created these vision boards for her to help her stay focused on a work, or if she was in between projects, a way to keep her motivated as a writer. And so this particular vision board is something that I think is really valuable in helping us envision futures, right? How do we reconnect with our stories? And vision boards, at least for Octavia Butler, was one of the strategies that she utilized to keep her writing. And so I incorporate this in my own writing classes and my lit classes. When we get into reading the novels, they will connect with the novels in this way by creating a vision board. And so when you're thinking about writing yourself, this might be an opportunity for you to get that free writing, but free write in a different way, as opposed to just taking out a journal. Get out your colored markers and write words that you want to incorporate into your stories, and see if that works for you. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to think about, or ask all of you to think about the people and places and practices within your own communities. So again, I'm not asking you to write Indigenous stories or Black or African stories. What I'm asking you to think about is your own stories. And your own stories start with you. A quote that I often share with my students is that we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. So we need to start with ourselves first. And we need to think about who our people are, who is our community, and what are our practices? Where do our practices take place, right? So thinking about your own people, places, and practices, what stories exist in those places? So as you think about your own people, your places, your practices, what stories exist for you? Are there stories that you have heard over and over that perhaps have you trapped in a kind of painful past? So if we think about the Afro Futurism, right, part of that is a response to the stories that had Black folks constantly stuck in slave narratives. Or stuck in trauma and pain, and not ever seeing stories where there was escape and future, right? So maybe you have a story of your own that you've heard over and over again that has you feeling kind of trapped yourself. What is that? And then have you wanted to write yourself out of that past? Have you wanted to imagine a different future? So what I thought would be really valuable for us in this time together, and then we'll hopefully have an opportunity to share on the other side if you feel comfortable. But think about, just for 5 minutes, who are your people? What's your place? What's home for you? And what practices do you celebrate as a part of your existence? And jot those down. And then think about stories that exist in those places, and try writing them out. And we'll take 5 minutes to just jot down some ideas. And then hopefully we'll have the opportunity to share on the other side of that 5 minutes. Does that make sense? So why don't we take 5 minutes and just do some free writing. If you were inspired by Octavia Butler's vision board, maybe you want to do a vision board of your people, places, and practices. And let's see what we come up with. Okay, let's go ahead and stop. And anyone interested in sharing what they came up with? If you would like to share, you'll just have to unmute yourself, and maybe you'll share your lovely face, because if we were in the real world of face-to-faceness, we would likely be in a classroom right now, and we'd be able to see your beautiful face and hear what you came up with.
This is one of the best parts about a writing workshop, is that you get to read your work to an audience.
Exactly.
Well, I just want to say, can you guys hear me? I can't see if I think I'm on video.
Yes, you are.
Guys, Michelle, I'm just loving what you're doing. And I'm taking so many notes because I teach a class on myth and how myths have become sort of like the old-fashioned myths have been sort of, relegated or, thrown aside. But the idea of mythic thinking, I think, can be very restorative. So I teach a book by Karen Armstrong, who she talks about myth and how the contemporary world doesn't really embrace it. But so much of your work that you're doing here feels mythic to me.
Yes.
And so I'm just thinking, I'm going to steal some of the stories you're sharing because I think they would really work and fill in certain pockets that are missing for me and in the work I'm doing. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
And I did some writing too, but I don't want to be the only one talking. but
well, I did see someone. I think it was Nicole had her hand up. Did I see that?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
All right. For some reason in my view, I can only see. Oh, there we go. Now I see everybody. I was like, I don't know who I'm talking to.
The story of my life.
I'm not going to read what I wrote because it's just way too roundabout, but it was a great exercise for me because I think it's so roundabout because I realized my family, my people, because I kind of went off of family, doesn't really have stories. It's like this mystery. It's like this stuff I would ask when I was a kid, like, what are we? Where did we come from? When did grandma fall in love with grandpa? What happened? When did people move to California? And it was we don't know. There's no, I'm like, wow, I guess I just realized, it was that there aren't those kind of stories and I thought, well, I kind of want a story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and for me too, I mean, part of my history is my dad was adopted and he was never interested in finding out about his family. And my grandparents were, you couldn't even say the word adopted. That wasn't it. And so I've always been curious about that, side of the family. And my response has been to it, and I think this is probably why I'm a writer, is that if I can't find what I'm looking for, then I'll make it up. And so I've spent, a good chunk of my life imagining what my real life is. And of course too, the notion of, Afro and, Afrofuturism. I mean, we think about, a lot of our BIPOC folks, they didn't even get a chance to know their community. They were robbed from that. And so I think in some ways it's tragic that, folks who, were not stolen, were not necessarily directly affected by, colonialization, that, those stories are there. We just didn't take the time to tell them. And I'm not sure why that is we were too busy being progressive or something. And so we've raised up our children without these stories, which I think is really tragic, because then it becomes a situation like you're expressing, Nicole, where what are our stories? And it also makes you wonder too, if that's the motivation for, some of these dystopian literatures that are created. Is it some result of people growing up not knowing their people, not knowing their places, not knowing their practices, and that's just a collective turmoil that generates these fictions? It's really sort of an unspoken experience of not knowing who your people are. I don't know.
Yeah, Michelle, I just like to jump in here and say I really appreciate what you're doing here. And this conversation has reminded me, I feel very fortunate that as a very young child, I would sit my mother's mother, my grandmother, who had come, all my grandparents were immigrants from Europe. And my grandmother would tell all these stories about her childhood, which is actually in near the border of Russia and Romania and so on. And they're wonderful stories, and I've been trying to tell them to my children as much as I can remember. But then I once went to this uncle of mine, let's say the only remaining sibling of my mother, in the family. And I started telling him and saying, my grandmother, your mother told me this story about something that happened when she was in school in Romania. And he says to me, "Oh, that's never happened. That's a figment. She made that up. This is all crazy." So I thought that was quite odd, but it made me realize that, I have to treasure that my grandmother was a myth maker. That she may very well have been creating this stuff out of her own childhood memories or whatever. But it's mythology. I mean, it's really great stuff. It's some of the best memories that I have from there. And I also wanted to comment to you that I in teaching English 1B, which I haven't done for a number of semesters, but I had been using American literature. I've been using having the students read Stephen Crane. I think I tried even once the Civil War novel, The Red Badge of Courage, and then I switched to Heart of Darkness, by Conrad, which I just think is this great masterpiece, but students mostly couldn't penetrate it. So then I finally I actually selected Kindred. I had a couple of semesters when I had the students in 1B read Kindred, and that was really terrific. I have to say I recommend it very highly for English 1B. I wasn't teaching Afrofuturism or anything of the sort, but it was really, I always would get this reaction that, from students, I don't like science fiction. I don't read science fiction. I don't know this, that. But, they all got into Kindred. It was very significant. It was a significant success, I have to say, in my 1B classes.
That's great.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have even thought of going onto the parables, those books. I mean, I think they're magnificent, but that would be very specialized, I think. But I mean, they're great books. They're terrific.
Well, and as I've indicated with the parables, it's just what I found with teaching it is that the students, number one, because it opens in 2024, which is, very close. So it's not so futuristic that it's hard to imagine. And of course, that it's taking place in California when the protagonist is heading up north, as they're heading north to find a place that they are. Oh, I got distracted. I think I saw a hand up. Victoire?
Yeah, I wanted you to finish your thought, though. I just wanted you to know I wanted to go next.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just kind of filling space until someone else wanted to share.
Hi, everybody. I'm Victoire. I hope my comments aren't inappropriate, so let me just segue into that. I didn't write to the prompts, but I wanted to say that my mother, Stajabu, is an accomplished poet and writer and has an anthology of short stories of Afrofuturistic women in space.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I wanted to recommend it.
Yes, please.
Caldonia's Daughters. Here, I'll put it in the chat.
Please put it in the chat. Yeah.
And like you were saying about your book, Michelle, it is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other online platforms. And it follows, the people leave Earth, and these African American women, generations of women, leave Earth, and then it just follows these generations of women in their different adventures in the future. So maybe check it out. And
is it flash fiction? Did you say? Is it like short fiction?
Short, yeah, short stories. And it's an anthology of stories about these women, these generations of women. And I was her editor. So any fault you see in the book, you can blame me as her editor.
Thanks for sharing. That's great. Hey, and we've already got someone who just got it on Kindle. Yeah. Did somebody want to be brave and share their
I will.
Okay.
Only because I'm so excited.
Yay.
Who knows? Well, so I had two things that happened. By the way, I'm so excited about that book because I'm teaching sudden fiction too. So this is great. You asked such a poignant question because, like a lot of us, my parents are from Eastern Europe. My mother was from the Ukraine. My father was from Poland. My brother was born in Germany. All three of them are now dead. I have no real ties to any of the family that I've got in Ukraine. We were corresponding for a while, and I guess the upheavals there, kind of helped us lose contact. So I've got busy with all of this COVID stuff. So I haven't been in touch with anybody. And my father's side of the family has been gone for a long time. So what I realized in all of this is that the story I'm telling about myself that isn't true is that I absolutely need something around me, some sort of family, something to hang on to. So I've been clinging to a really toxic relationship that I'm about to end because I think I've been hanging on to something that for the sake of having something or someone around me that I call family. And so it's very interesting that this coincides with what's going on.
It's all connected.
Yeah, we so desperately want to be connected that sometimes it's not healthy.
Yeah.
And so I'm stepping out into the void of kind of not being connected and connecting more to who I think I can be and a little bit more independent and knowing that I don't need to have I don't need to have that. Anyway, but that's where I went with it.
Nice. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Very interesting.
Others, questions, observations, thoughts?
I'll just say, Michelle, that I didn't actually write because I was concerned about managing our Zoom meeting.
Thank you for that.
I was desperately trying to make notes so that I can do it later. So you've provided me with something that I can do later on and spend more time with. And so I really thank you for that. It's a good activity.
Well, good. And that was obviously that was the hope. And again, I think the value to, what does it mean, as what I'm hoping, people gain from today's talk. Number one is that they, reconnect with themselves and have the opportunity to write, because obviously I believe in that. The other thing too, that I think is really valuable is that, I know for myself personally that once I started opening up myself to reading materials that, didn't necessarily connect with me personally, that my love of literature just grew. And, working with the Emoja program for the last 5 years has been amazing, because it's got me reading all sorts of things that maybe were it not for the Emoja program, I wouldn't have picked up. And so I think sometimes we get stuck in a rut and we just read what we like to read, what makes us feel comfortable. And so I would invite everyone to, start reading the stories of people who are not like you at all. And then, of course, the wonderful thing about it is that you start reading and you think that this has nothing to do with me. And then you start to realize that you have more in common with each other than you actually realized. The other thing that I wanted to share is that Parable of the Sower actually is such a phenomenal work, right? It started as a novel, was published in 1993, and it just came out as a graphic work this past year. And it's Damian Duffy and John Jennings, and they also did the graphic work of Butler's novel Kindred. And they're working on completing Parable of the Talents, which I believe is due to be released in 2022. And so it's a very powerful work, right? How it keeps coming into our future, in part because it feels like we have a lot of unfinished business with our world that we're living in. And we keep seeing these same stories popping up because these stories aren't history. There are now. And the other thing that's really powerful is that with the popularity of, well, I don't know if you want to call this popularity, but the certain president who we had not too long ago, if you read the opening pages of Parable of the Talents, in many ways, it's almost as if 45 had picked up Parable of the Talents and was giving the lecture that the person who was running for president in Parable of the Talents. It was just eerie how they were so close to the same. And as a result of that, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents actually went to the bestseller list within the last couple of years. Never was a bestseller, but is now a bestseller because there's so many connections that we can see. And Tenerife Du, she is a science fiction writer and a professor at UCLA. She brought, her name is Toshi Reagon, and her mother is, I can't think of her name. I'm having a brain fart right now, but she and Toshi Reagon came up with Parable of the Sower opera. It's a rock opera, and it's incredible sounding. It was debuted live right before, 2 weeks before the shutdown of COVID. And I'm constantly scouring the internet to see, they actually did a production of the Parable of the Sower in Dubai, of all places. And so I keep waiting for the rock opera to be available. And I thought I would conclude this talk, if there isn't anything extra, with one of the songs from the Parable of the Sower's rock opera. Toshi Reagon is the person who wrote the music for it. And I think it's, again, it encapsulates, this particular song encapsulates that idea of futurism in a wonderful way, which is, that there is hurt in us, there is pain and suffering, but there's also the promise of tomorrow. And that if we have the ability to write a new future and invite a new future that is not just monolithic, but open and wide and diverse and unique in all of the offerings, that maybe the world doesn't have to go crazy. And so I'd like to play that particular song. And if there aren't any other questions or observations or thoughts. Yes, and Adrienne Marie Brown is wonderful. They did, Adrienne Marie Brown and Toshi Reagon, if you like podcasts, I love podcasts, they have the Parables podcast, and they read through both Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, and they had a discussion after each chapter. So they finished both of them, and those are all available. So if you want to have a conversation like experience with the novels. I, in fact, recommend that my students listen to it because, committing to an entire novel when most of their lives are tweets and posts and TikTok videos, it's a nice way to help them connect with the literature. Other thoughts, questions, observations before I play Toshi? I just love this song. I think you'll love it too.
I just sorry I can't turn on my video, but I just wanted to I think it was Ivan that said something about grandmother as myth maker. Sorry if it was someone else, but I think it was Ivan.
No, it was.
That really helped me bring together some of my thoughts here. My family is about as waspy as it gets, and for me, grandmother as myth maker is more about the myth of the present rather than the past, and the myth of keeping up that appearance and all of the little lies and stories that we tell to fit into that mold. So thank you, Ivan, for those words.
Yeah, great.
I was also touched by that idea of grandmother as myth maker, and it was really interesting to me because I had a very similar experience where my grandmother told me some stories, and when I repeated them to her children, they were like, "What? No." Yeah. I think she was already in dementia when she said that. That didn't happen. And I'm like, "But you weren't there. She's telling me stories about when she was a kid. How do you know?" Right. And then I tried to do some investigation into, her childhood and upbringing, and I came up empty. Like I wrote to the birth certificate office and all kind of stuff. I found nothing, and that just made more questions. Right.
Yeah. See, I think that's classic, Victoria. That's how I felt with my grandmother. It's like, hey, I'm not inclined to believe my uncle. He grew up in New York City. My grandmother grew up in Romania.
Exactly. How does he know? And it's Victoire, by the way. It's Victoire. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, though, it's that idea that you're told the stories, and of course that then you get into that whole debate of whether it's true and whether it really happened. And I guess sometimes I feel like, does it matter, if it's true or if it really happened? If it's the story that kind of holds your family together, whether it's true or not, because I can't tell you how many times when I go back and you're, having family dinner or things like that, and you're sitting around and you'll start telling stories about things and they're sitting there and they're like, well, it didn't happen that way. And that wasn't what was said. And, and it's like, but that's how I remember it. Right. And so I think sometimes, it's the idea of stories is that it's stories and the act of telling stories, it brings us together. And so whether it's true or not, or whether it really happened or not, it's now a part of your family. It's part of your people. It's part of your community because it's a story that you all share together. So whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter anymore because now it's part of the common story of your family. Right. And so I think that's awesome. Oh, there's lots of, let's see. There is the narrative truth, yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, let me go ahead and play Toshi Reagon.
Hello, friend. Have you heard the news today? Whole world's gone crazy. Hello, old friend. Have you heard the news today? Whole world's gone crazy. Zillions of people on the road trying to find their way. What's on the road coming up from behind? What you gonna do when the world's on fire? How you gonna keep moving with your heart hurt and your whole body scarred and tired? Carrying all you got on your back, trying to be strategic, finding out what you got and who will believe it. Action, action, always calling out your name. Don't care if you're ready, don't care if you in pain. As we open our hearts and eyes to see, the whole world's gone crazy, except for you and me. As we open our hearts and eyes to see, whole world's gone crazy, except for you and me. What's on the road up ahead of us? What's on the road coming up from behind?
There we go. All right. Well, I want to thank you. I would actually like to do a redo button because I feel like I rushed through everything and like, wait a minute, this didn't go as high practice. But hopefully everyone is inspired to read all sorts of different literatures. And then on top of that, just, think about incorporating more BIPOC folks in your classes. I think it's really important. Even if you have a class full of white people, I think having them have their life a little bit more colorful would be a very good thing, particularly in this world that we're living in right now. So I did put my email address in the chat, and I have a ton of works that I would happily share with you, works if you're, wanting some other suggestions. And thank you for this opportunity. And it was a pleasure to kick off this little midway opportunity.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I just want to point out that Carolyn did put a reading list in the chat for those of you who want to capture the books that Michelle talked about today, so that you can go buy them afterward. Also, don't forget that Michelle has a book too, Man Kills Girlfriend Over Cold Sandwiches. You might want to check that out as well. I so enjoyed your presentation, Michelle. Thank you so much for doing this and being a part of our event.